everyone. I am Kangsha, the Executive Director of Club of Law Students, moderator for today's session. Welcome you all on behalf of Club of Law Students, a remarkable initiative meant for achieving and better attainment of legal excellence founded by Mr. Soumya Sanjay. Founded with the objective of ensuring healthy intellectual discourse through interactive lectures and sessions, this platform is slowly but steadily moving towards its goal. Adding to the objective of this group, today's lecture session is on the topic human rights advocacy. Human rights advocacy aims to create or implement human rights law, rules, or policy. Human rights advocacy relies on credible research and documentation of patterns of abuse. Thus, effective research and information is a heart of human rights advocacy. With this, I welcome the guest speaker for today's session, Honorable Dr. Y.S.R. Murthy Sir, Vice Chancellor of RV University. Sir is a former civil servant from 1985 batch of IAS and Allied Services and has held many responsible and sensitive assignments in National Human Rights Commission, Prime Minister's Office, Cabinet Secretariat, and many such other places. Sir has published several books, journals, articles, and many other things. Dr. Murthy has been elected as a Vice President of Indian Society of International Law for 3 years between 2018 and 2021. Sir is a unique blend of academic powers and practical wisdom. With this short intro of yours, sir, I welcome you on this platform behalf of Club of Law Students for today's session and hope that this session gives us a lot of insight about today's topic.
Thank you so much, sir. And one more to add, it's a remarkable blessing from you that Club of Law Students had signed an agreement of cooperation and friendship with RV University, kind of MOU with RV University. And for this cooperation, for this collaboration, sir, we are very thankful to you. We're very, and you are again the third time again with the panel of this Club of Law Students. We are indeed blessed with you, sir. And we are hoping that we are moved to steadily we will move to the success what we endeavor what we had think before this Club of Law Students had started. Thank you so much, sir, for the cooperation. And I request you to hand the mic and start, please. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. And sorry for the long introduction. And I compliment the Club of Law students and its office bearers for taking this initiative. And I'm also compliment all the participants of this web meeting for their interest in this undertaking this program. And I'll try and share my perspectives with all of you. And Soumya, can you move on to the next slide about the overview of the presentation?
For sure,
Um,
for sure, for sure.
I plan to first deal with what are human rights. Of course, though the previous speakers have covered it, I'll just briefly explain the human rights and also touch upon the contemporary challenges. Before moving on to the role of civil society and also the kind of strategies they adopt for promoting human rights, for securing human rights, and also try and pick up some few case studies of NGOs or other civil society organizations about advocacy camps and the kind of impact they had. As you know, Soumya, next one, human rights are rights which belong to every human being the moment he or she is born into the human family, and whether the person is rich or poor, whether the person is from majority community or minority community, whether the person is a person with disability or otherwise, whether the person is a black or white or any other color, whether man or woman, every human being is expected to have the same rights. have the entire range of civil, political, as well as economic, social, cultural rights. And these are equal, inalienable, and also held by all human beings. And dignity is the quintessence of human rights. But if next slide, please. But if you look at across the world, you will find that there are still many challenges which persist today. Recently, we observed the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The UDHR, if you see right in the first article, it clearly says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. But yet, dignity and justice for all is still an elusive goal. There are many sections of society who are still held in chains, who are not able to enjoy the full range of human rights on par with others. Here, I want to
Hello.
highlight or flag a few challenges which we currently face.
Please, Anish,
Next slide,
chalo,
please.
okay.
Okay, patriarchy. For example, we live in a highly patriarchal and hierarchical society, caste-ridden society, and the woman's social, economic, political
एक
status
यार मुझे
is
एक
not
सेकंड दो.
what it should be. As women hold half the sky, yet if you look at their enjoyment of right to education, right to health, right to work, and many other rights, there is a big gap between them and others. And similarly, as a result of the caste-based
चल यार कोई बैठे तो
discrimination,
कॉल
prejudices,
करता हूँ ना.
and then poverty, underdevelopment, armed conflicts,
नहीं
corruption.
वो
There are
चलो
even now there are contemporary manifestations of slavery, like in the form of
तो
children who are forced into commercial sexual exploitation, and illiteracy, lack of awareness. Of course, climate change is another major challenge, and the state of our national or state human rights institutions is again a major challenge. Next slide, please. Here are some more challenges. For example, the 2021 census has not been held, but the earlier census has held that there are 1 million child laborers. During COVID pandemic, it is expected that the number would have gone up further, and many children went out of education. And even today, no, there are 8 children are trafficked every day in the country. And similarly, bonded labor exists, manual scavenging, despite legislations, despite are discriminated against. And so now these kind of challenges that it's not possible for the government alone to address all these challenges, and that's why there is a need for complementing the efforts of government by the civil society. Next slide, please. I will just briefly explain what is civil society. Civil society is initially understood as whatever is not government, and is regarded as civil society. Now you can add even the private sector, whatever is not as a part of the private sector, and the government can be regarded as civil society, that include community groups, advocacy organizations, professional associations, trade unions, media, faith-based groups, grassroots movements, etc. In a way, they promote participatory governance and also advocate human rights, social justice, and also sustainable development. They act as intermediaries between citizens and the state. They articulate the grievances of the people, human rights violations, and also they represent marginalized communities, and make advocate with the government, and then try to hold the government accountable for their actions. Next slide, please. Okay. These civil society organizations adopt a range of tools for effectiveness, and I'll just Aparna mentioned during the course of her initial remarks about research and documentation. I just want to tell you about some 20 years back, the Institute of Social Sciences, a Delhi-based NGO, was concerned about the trafficking in women and children in collaboration with National Human Rights Commission. They took a research study on the trends and patterns of interstate, inter-country trafficking in women and children for begging, for commercial sexual exploitation, and a number of other purposes, including camel jockeying. And then mentioned about what actions need to be taken to sensitize police officers, judicial officers, border security agencies, and other civil society, the government, etc. So here is a example of how an NGO, along with the National Commission, undertook a research study and also documented the trends of um, uh, trafficking in women and children. And then public awareness, for instance, the NGOs and the civil society organizations often identify a serious human rights issue and try and raise public awareness through a multiple means, and then try to advance the human rights of dispossessed, marginalized, disempowered citizens. They also, as a part of their work, try to raise funds so that they can provide they are carry out the work that they do. For example, you might have heard of Greenpeace, you might have heard of Oxfam, which works on poverty, you might have heard of many other non-governmental organizations. One of the tools they use is they raise funds for causes which are dear to them. For instance, the cause could be elimination of domestic violence. Cause could be stopping dowry. Cause could be rehabilitation of trafficked women victims. So there could be a multiplicity of causes. So they identify the cause and they seek funds from donors within, outside, and then in the process they also build allies. They build alliances with like-minded organizations to further their own objectives, to further the to to take care of the causes which they espouse. Advocacy for law, policy, and institutional reform. For instance, I highlighted the state of our national human rights institutions as a major challenge. For instance, the National Human Rights Commission was due for renewal of its accreditation before a international body called Global Alliance of NHRIs based in Geneva, and the NGOs got together and they were not happy with the way the NHRC was constituted, the way all NHRIs were supposed to conform with the Paris principles, which talk about autonomy, independence, pluralism in their composition, etc., etc. But as the current commissions are not really effective, the Indian NGOs got together and then sought to downgrade the National Human Rights Commission of India. Their objective is not anti-national. Their objective is they want to see a robust institution which will meet the public expectations, particularly those people on the man on the street, the common man or woman whose wrongs are whose rights are violated. And so here is a in that process, the Indian NGOs, including Association of Individuals for Monitoring, NHRI, is called INE, uh, um, got together, and then they tried to partner with the international organizations so that their objective was a stronger protection of human rights act, a stronger national human rights commission which can meet the expectations of the general public. So sometimes the non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, in fact, as you know, there are legislations for protection of women. For instance, if you look at Dowry Prohibition Act is there, Domestic Violence Act is there, the Preconception Prenatal Diagnostics Act is there, there is an Indecent Representation of Women Act is there. Sometimes these acts are not working properly. They have some loopholes, and then there is a need for plugging those loopholes, and then there is a need for law reform to for a greater protection of the woman. Similarly, there are exists a range of laws for protecting children. For example, prohibiting child marriages, child labor, then child trafficking. There are a number of laws, even for persons with disabilities. But these laws are not perfect, and then they require reform. They require policy reform. They require law reform. So the civil society organizations often advocate for law reform, policy reform, and also institutional reform. Some of them adopt media advocacy in a very nice way. And then, for example, many, many years back when TADA, Terrorist Activities, Disruptive Activities Prevention Act, was in force, the NGOs documented it and found that it was used in states which did not have terror problems at all. It was used against environmental activists. It was used against labor activists. And then they documented the misuse or abuse of the act. And then they publicized those findings through the media. And this media advocacy, naming and shaming, ultimately had a beneficial impact in the sense that TADA was dropped, and then later on it resurfaced in another form called POTA. And then later on, when there was a massive advocacy against it, finally the government put all the provisions in Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. But I am flagging it for the purpose of mentioning it as a tool for one of the tools which are employed by the civil society organizations. Legal interventions, for example, I'm going to explain it in further detail. Long years back, there was an activist called Javed Abedi. He fought that persons with wheelchair, when they have to board a flight, are being physically lifted along with their wheelchair and were being placed in the aircraft. And he felt it was violation of their dignity. And then he filed a public interest litigation, and then which really shook the Air India, Indian Airlines, and other airlines. And finally, the government had to introduce Ambu lift, whereby a wheelchair user can be taken to the aircraft in a very dignified manner. Similarly, he also filed another PIL for making electoral voting booths accessible to the persons with disabilities. His petition finally led to the Supreme Court issuing a number of directions for construction of ramps, and also use of braille on the electronic voting machines, or also other ways, so that the persons with disabilities are enabled to exercise their franchise. Elections are looming around the corner, and then so this was an important intervention by Javed Abedi and his organization called National Council for Promotion of Employment of Persons with Disabilities. And there are many other legal interventions. While on this topic, I just want to flag one more. For example, you know about the northeastern Indian state of Manipur, where there was a protracted armed conflict of about 6 decades, and so Manipur was placed under Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and there a number of innocent civilians were, lost their lives in what are called extrajudicial executions. And here is a NGO called Extrajudicial Execution Victim Families Association, or called EFARM, which documented about 1,528 such cases, and moved the Supreme Court of India. And the Supreme Court came out with a number of interim directions which said that armed forces do not have impunity, or do not have immunity for human rights violations. It was a very important order. They asked the Central Bureau of Investigation to investigate some of those shortlisted cases, and asked the government to file what you call actions against the police personnel concerned who caused the extrajudicial executions. And this is a landmark case. You are aware of the 15-year hunger force by Iram Sharmila, and also the protest by Manipuri women in front of Kangla Fort, where they threw away their clothes and then asked the security forces to come and rape us. So these are the kinds of things where an NGO, through documenting research, and then moves legal intervention, and then the Supreme Court appointed Maneka Guruswamy as a amicus curiae, and the proceedings are still continuing. And here, the effort is to secure accountability for the violations or the extrajudicial executions committed by the security forces. And then the civil society organizations are also involved in capacity building or training of various stakeholders. They also use international advocacy and diplomacy, particularly in the Human Rights Council meetings in Geneva, or in the UN charter-based bodies, or treaty-based bodies in New York, and then try to advance their goals. They also use social mobilization. They also use dialogue and negotiation, and also involved in education and training. Next slide, please. Now, media is a part of civil society, and you heard of investigative reporting. For instance, long years back, Indian Express carried an investigative report about Bhagalpur blindings, how security forces or the police personnel put some acid in the eyes of a what you call under trial prisoners, and it became a big case, and where the Supreme Court has ordered redress. And then there have been many media reports which formed basis for either Supreme Court to take suo motu cognizance, or the National Human Rights Commission to exercise its suo motu jurisdiction and initiate proceedings. So media has a great role as a watchdog. And then for example, media campaigns for justice in Nirbhaya case, Jessica Lal, or Priyadarshini Mattu murder cases have led to a lot of positive results, where holding the perpetrators accountable. Of course, media has both a positive role as well as a negative role. Sometimes the kind of stereotyping done that is done, the kind of sensationalism, the kind of even in times of communal riots, the kind of media can be a force for building bridges, or it can also be a potent force for creating divisions, creating or perpetuating the existing divisions. Sometimes in every communal riot, if you see, it was preceded by an email campaign or a SMS campaign, or sensationalism on the part of some media. So it's well uh, reported, and it's well documented. while analyzing the role of media as a part of civil society, we need to be mindful of the both the positive as well as the negative impacts of the media. Next slide, please. You're aware of the Sushant Singh Rajput's case. Quite often, you find media trial happens, and then without facts, based on rumors, unsubstantiated claims, etc., etc., which undermine the principles of fair trial, presumption of innocence, but also tarnish the reputations of individual. So media organizations often chase TRPs, and then in the casualty being accurate, objective, factual reporting. And reporters often invade privacy, dignity of individuals connected to the news. Next slide, please. Uh, Trade unions also have as a part of civil society, have a major role in advancing human rights. As you know, labor rights are human rights. For example, right to just conditions of work is an economic, social, cultural right. For example, everybody should have weekly off, and then there should be minimum hours of work, and then there are occupational safety, health. There are many other cherished rights which are part of ILO conventions, some of which have been accepted by government of India. So, for instance, the trade unions, when they there are many case studies of trade unions, how they have used and then various tools and then for collective bargaining in the interest of labor rights. They're also involved in legal advocacy and support, and some trade unions campaign for social justice and also for education and empowerment and solidarity and international advocacy. So I have given few examples of how trade unions have used their what do you call their collective voices to advance labor rights. Next, please. Now, we talked about the tools employed by NGOs and civil society organizations, which include raising awareness and also, for example, both Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, and there are many others, international, national. They regularly conduct research, publish reports, organize campaigns. For instance, abolish death penalty is a campaign. Abolish torture is another campaign. They regularly undertake campaigns from time to time to address various human rights violations, including gender-based violence. They also work on legal support and advocacy. For instance, NGOs like Lawyers Collective and Human Rights Law Network, they have extended legal assistance to marginalized community, including children, Dalits, and helping them navigate into the legal system and access their rights. They also work on policy advocacy and lobbying. I mentioned to you about how Javed Abedi and his organization, along with the other disability organizations, staged a Dharna in front of Shastri Bhavan, which houses the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, just to get Persons with Disabilities Act notified in the statute books and the rules to be framed. And then when 1995 Act was not fulfilling the aspirations of the persons with disabilities, again the advocacy efforts made by Javed Abedi and other disability organizations have led to the 2016 Act. Okay, and capacity building. People's Union for Civil Liberties has played a major role during emergency, and they keep conducting workshops, training programs, and then monitoring and documentation. Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, as you are aware of, works on issues like access to justice, police issues, and also prisons. And so they keep bringing out excellent reports on some of these issues. Next slide, please. Here are some case studies of successful advocacy campaigns. Next. For instance, I talked to you about the persons with disabilities. They have a right to, I mean, they must enjoy all human rights, including civil, political, economic, social, cultural rights, on par with others. But often you find that there are physical, mental, social, attitudinal barriers which prevent them from exercising their rights on par with other human beings. When Constitution of India was adopted way back in 1948, the caste-based disability was a what you call in prominence as compared to disability related, for example, access to bathing guards, wells, restaurants, or practice of caste-based discrimination was addressed. If you look at Article 15, there are number of prohibited grounds of discrimination, but they do not explicitly mention physical disability or a mental disability, but there other grounds are mentioned. So the NGOs, particularly the NCPDP, has in its shadow report highlighted the need to amend Article 15 of the Constitution of India so that the discrimination faced by persons with disability is explicitly put there. In 2019, the UN Committee on Rights of Persons with Disability also recommended asked Indian government to correct the historical injustice. And recently, this organization, which was once led by NCP, EDP, led by Javed Abedi, released a manifesto for and by persons with disabilities, giving a list of demands. And as a result of that, Congress, CPM have included the need for constitutional amendment to Article 15 to explicitly provide disability as a ground for discrimination. So here is a concrete example of legislative advocacy by NGOs, and because of the consistent aggressive advocacy campaign around the manifesto, some of the political parties have already included the demand to extend protection of Article 15 to persons with disabilities. Next slide, please. I told you about how Javed Abedi's PILs have led to orders from the Supreme Court, the need to make polling booths accessible. And then the Election Commission has partnered with disability rights organization to conduct training programs. And then next slide, please. During COVID pandemic, there were many serious human rights violations, including right to health, including right to livelihood, right to education, many other rights. So there are again the Red Cross Society of India, Public Health Foundation, Akshay Patra, Snehi, and then many other NGOs have done a splendid work to address the human rights violations, and they again employed a range of tools, including research, documentation, and also advocacy, and also fundraising, raising awareness, etc. Next slide, please. Farm loss, you're aware of the issue and how the human rights activists and organizations highlighted the adverse impact on the farmers' livelihood, particularly small and marginalized farmers, and the kind of tools employed by them to raise awareness, advocacy, etc., etc., finally resulted in the repeal of the controversial farm laws by the government of India in November 2021. When you talk about case studies of successful actions by civil society organizations, here is one where the protests, dharna, and also highlighting the adverse impacts by a number of organizations have finally culminated in the repeal of the farm laws. Next slide, please. Um, Anmol, I'll come back to you. Just give me a few minutes. I'll just finish off, wrap it up, and then we'll open it for questions.
Yeah,
Uh,
close it the last.
yeah, like for example, in the decriminalization of Section 377, here is again another case study where the Supreme Court of India in Navtejing Johar versus Union of India, it held Section 377 to be unconstitutional. But prior to it, you find that human rights organizations such as NAS Foundation, Lawyers Collective have spearheaded legal challenges against Section 377 in Indian court in the landmark Naj Foundation versus Government of NCT of Delhi in 2009. The Delhi High Court struck down Section 377, decriminalizing the consensual homosexual activity. Here was a lot of advocacy, legal intervention resorted to by the non-governmental organization, which eventually led to a successful outcome. The 377 Quit India campaign, launched by the Humsuffer Trust, other LGBTQI organizations, and they used social media, street theater, community events to mobilize for repealing Section 377. Human Rights Watch released reports documenting abuses against LGBTQI individuals, and which drew global attention to the issue. And Lawyers Collective and LGBT Rights Initiative offered pro bono legal services to LGBTQ plus individuals, filed petitions on their behalf, and advocated for their rights before courts. And academic institutions published research documenting colonial legacy of the Section 377, contrasting it with the ethos of Indian culture, mobilizing support for the issue. Next slide, please. Here is again another successful intervention by civil society organizations. In 2014, Supreme Court recognized transgender individuals as a third gender, affirming their self-identify their gender identity irrespective of biological factors. In 2019, the government also passed the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019. Organizations like National Legal Services Authority, NALSA, and Lawyers Collective conducted research, provided other support, and represented the interests of transgender individuals in court. And today, many application forms mentioned about male, female, and other as a third this thing. And then they have raised awareness about the discrimination challenges faced by transgender persons, mobilized support for legal recognition of their rights, and investigative reports, opinion pieces, news coverage. So these are the number of tools employed in conjunction or in tandem by NGOs, which have finally led to the legal recognition of the transgender rights. I think with this, I stop, and then we can take questions from the participants. Soumya, can you please stop sharing the PPT, please? Anumol raised a hand.
Yeah, it was by mistake, sir.
Oh, okay, no problem. The floor is
Anyone else
open
have the
for
queries?
questions.
Yeah, Arvind Sharma.
Yes.
Sir Vaishantha, sir, thank you for the wonderful conversation. I just have a query. We all understand now what human rights are after 20, 30 years of them being emphasized. But let's say I'm studying in LLM, a lot of my classmates are youngsters at the age of 25, 30. If they see a violation of a human right, it could be that they find a building where you don't have access for disabled people, which the law says they should have. Or if they see that in a government office, the way somebody is treated, it does violate some aspect of human rights. Or the way the police would still violate and treat a complainant or somebody else. How do you think they should go about addressing it? Right now, there's a feeling of helplessness that I know a little bit, I'm seeing a violation, but I really don't know how to help that violation not being repeated. Could you advise us this?
Okay, thank you for raising this very important issue. I mean, as students of law, as practitioners of law, we study the law and its tools. And when we encounter the in practice a violation, what do we do? Again, there are a range of actions which are open. For instance, you have district courts, you have high court, you have a supreme court, and then you have national and state human rights institutions, and you have a range of tools like right to information. You can file a RTI application, and you can also use media to highlight. For instance, the moment you understand something as a human rights violation, you need to articulate it, you need to draw attention to it, and you need to secure redress for the victim. And often the victim is a empowered, disenfranchised individual. Here I want to, since we are on the topic of role of civil society, I want to tell you one small anecdote. Um, in Madhya Pradesh, there are people who often travel to as a migrant laborers to Gujarat for working in their quartz mines, and then as a result of working in the quartz mine, they inhale the silica dust. Okay, and the dust goes and settles in their lungs, and here it's called something called silicosis, and then it can't be removed from their lungs, and they die a painful death. So here an NGO identified it as a serious issue, and they found that the migrant laborers who are working in these quartz mines are having a premature death, and it's an occupational this thing. And they, once they identify as a serious issue for which there is no cure, okay, then they write to the Human Rights Commission with a complaint, and then the Human Rights Commission initiates action, issues notice to the Gujarat government and other concerned governments about the need for their occupational safety, makes a number of recommendations. And when see, for example, when we are talking about the tools that are available to NGOs, etc., once the person from the who is advocating the issue of silicosis and the related deaths brought a huge lock to he was upset with the lack of action on the part of the National Human Rights Commission. He said, look, here are many migrant laborers dying as a result of inhaling the silica dust, and I have articulated, I have sent a complaint, and there is a tardiness in just dealing with the complaint. He says, I want to put this lock to the Human Rights Commission. So it was a kind of a protest by him, and which really opened and moved or shaken the organization to further action. So, for instance, I have seen the protest resorted to by the human rights or disability organizations in Canada when they were upset with the Canadian Parliament. Some 50 odd wheelchair users occupied the Canadian Parliament lobby. They brought all of them came together, and then imagine the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa. Suddenly you find the whole lobby was filled with wheelchairs, and they wanted to draw attention to their cause. So there are a number of so when you understand a particular violation through the frame of through the lens of law, and you know that here is a violation of rights of a human being, and then you need to articulate it, you need to document it, you need to seek redress for it, and there are a number of mechanisms which are open to it. And today's talk, we covered some of those mechanism. One could be legal intervention, other could be public awareness, other could be law reform, policy reform. When you redress an individual complaint, you are just securing justice to an individual. But if you, let's say, redress the underlying issue, for example, acid victims are there. For example, people buy acid easily. When somebody is jilted in love, somebody wants to settle the score, they throw acid. But when you make the purchase, the use, or etc., etc., as when you amend the law, where you are trying to instead of a single individual, you are trying to do a systemic reform or a major reform which will be of consequence to everybody. Um, for instance, I want to again narrate another story. While I was working with the National Human Rights Commission, there was a civil servant in Delhi who employed a child laborer at his house. One day, he branded him with a hot iron rod, and the only fault of the child was that he drank the leftover milk. And so this came as a major item in the newspaper, and the Human Rights Commission took suo moto cognizance. And so, for example, they could have just made a recommended disciplinary action against the person concerned, but they went into the root of the matter. They said, okay, central government servants are governed by something called CCS conduct rules, Central Civil Services conduct rules. They went and amended. In fact, NHRC recommended an amendment to the conduct rule so that no civil servant can employ a child laborer across the country. And if they do so, it will amount to a major misconduct, punishable, or with necessary legal sanctions. So it's very important not only to address individual violations, but also look at law reform and policy reform, which benefits across the country, across the various groups.
Thank you for the practical wisdom, sir.
Uh, may I request Mr. Arvind Sharma to introduce yourself? You had asked a doubt now. Can you please introduce yourself?
Sir, sorry, I forgot the basic courtesies. My name is Captain Arvind Sharma. I am presently a student of the LLM course at RV University School of Law, sir.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else have the query uh, yeah, Madhu ma'am. Yeah, please, please, ma'am. You can unmute yourself, ma'am, first.
Good evening, everyone, and Professor Murthy, thanks a lot for the wonderful presentation. I have two small questions. I'm a development professional with MSW, MBA, and PhD, working in development sector for the last 30 years. And my first question was, you mentioned a lot role of NGOs in the advocacy thing. But in the current scenario, a lot of NGOs are being cornered due to FCR or any other rules. I mean, how do you think is good for the civil society movement, or it doesn't matter? And second one is question is, because I'm not from law, a lot of advocacy is done through PIL. What is the procedure for filing PIL? That's my very small thing for last week.
I'm sorry, your audio was not okay. I'm sorry, there was some problem with your audio. I couldn't follow your question.
Okay. Can I be more loud? Can you hear me now?
Ma'am, can you please type on the chat box?
There is some shrillness in your audio. I
If I'm
couldn't
not
follow.
wrong, you're asking about the role of NGO in contemporary times, basically in India, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. See what
She also
happened.
did ask the
Um,
procedure to how to file a PIN, probably.
okay,
Yes.
if I understand your question as what you call amplified by Soumya, you want to know the role of NGOs in contemporary times. Is that it?
Yes.
They complement and supplement the efforts of the government agencies. For example, the role of state is shrinking. Government cannot be everywhere. For example, human rights are so important matters, burning matters. It is a responsibility of everyone. For example, let's say a five-member or a eight-member body at sitting in Delhi, like comprising a national commission, cannot take care of every nook and corner of the country. So they need allies. They need people who have who have a grassroots presence, who identify violations at the grassroots level, articulate and bring to the notice of the organization. So today, what happened,
बताइए.
even in contemporary times, you have seen the challenges starting from patriarchy, underdevelopment, terrorism, and many other challenges like bonded labor, child labor, women's violations. They still
VCR
continue.
videos.
Even trafficking in women and children continues
Definitely, sir.
unabated. So, keeping all these challenges, including contemporary manifestations of slavery, climate change, and other newer challenges, the civil society has a major role, continuing role and relevance in the current times, because government alone cannot transform or create a society where every human being is able to enjoy all human rights on par with others. If I ask you, you will still be able to find today many sections which are not able to enjoy human rights. So that's why there is still a lot of role, relevance for the NGOs, trade unions, media, and other organizations to complement the efforts of governmental agencies.
Thank you, sir. I hope Madhu ma'am has agreed with the answer given by Murthy sir, and I can notice some few hand raised. Um, like, yeah, Mr. Karthik Asthana sir would be questioning. Yeah, please, sir.
Thank you for your talk, sir. Uh, it was very pleasing to see you again, first of all.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've
Nice to see you
seen,
again, Karthik.
yeah,
Yeah,
I've seen you earlier in JGU, sir, when
I
you
know. Yeah,
served
I
as a
remember
registrar.
you. I remember you. Yeah, you were in
And I,
JSGP. Okay,
no, I was in the JSIA, sir.
JSIA. Okay,
JSIA,
okay, okay,
yeah.
okay.
And I've always seen you as very approachable and very active in the organization. And I guess I have taken it from you, perhaps,
Okay.
to be very approachable. Sorry, I did not introduce myself. I am Karthik Asthana, assistant professor at Department of Legal Education, ISDC, Allahabad University. So I'm very happy to see you. And these are the students, Soumya, Sanjay, and Aparna are my students. And perhaps they asked me to join. They asked me
Wonderful.
to join,
Wonderful.
and I did wanted to hear your talk. My
Wonderful.
question would be, sir, so what would be the incentive when we talk about human rights? We always talk about civil society groups and other organization, sometimes partially marginalized organization also working towards human rights initiative. But what incentive we can give politicians to further the agenda of advocacy of human rights so that they work on this on a better way? What politicians incentive, or I would say means what work they should do, or what incentive we should be giving them, so that human rights do not remain on the fringe of the society as such, and we have this uh, uh, an active force implementing it, rather on the not only the mainstream cities, but also on the in the hinterlands.
Karthik, you have raised a very, very important question. See, it's some 20, 30 years back, the government believed in welfare. Like, they would allocate some 30 crores for rural development, 100 crores for urban development, and then feel that, that treat the people as a passive beneficiaries of some larger say.
Yeah.
But the human rights construct regards every individual as a bearer of rights. When you put the human rights gives a very powerful language. It's a claim, it's a right, it's an entitlement. There's a legal element to it. When you say a person has a right to education, the state is supposed to see that a school is created within a kilometer or 2 kilometer radius. Similarly, right to health means the state is supposed to take positive actions to see that individual's right is realized. So gone are the days when the individual was treated as a object of charity or welfare, but this human rights paradigm has shifted the whole this thing. But coming back to the politicians, this thing, why should a country, or why should let's say legislatures respect and promote respect and protect human rights? There are a number of things. One, our Constitution of India was adopted by ourselves, our founding frame fathers of our republic, the Constituent Assembly, and then this is what we have given to ourselves. If you look at the preamble, if you look at chapter 3, chapter 4, so there is a number of rights which are mentioned there. So these are the goals which are there in the Constitution of India, and then subsequently amplified in legislations for women, children, persons with disabilities, transgender, and other sections. Okay, now coming back to the what you call in addition to these constitutional ideals or goals, they are also Indian government has signed. These are universally recognized ones. For example, UDHR is there. There are some 70 odd legally binding conventions, out of which there are 9 core treaties, including there's a racial discrimination convention, torture convention. There are conventions for dealing with women, children, migrant workers. There are conventions dealing with enforced disappearances, civil political rights, economic, social, cultural rights, torture, etc. So by which these are some of these treaties have been signed by majority of countries. Today, there is not a single country which has not signed a human rights convention. So these are obligations flowing from having signed or ratified international convention. And more than anything, these are moral imperatives. So that's why political parties need to put mainstream human rights, because these are universally like respect for life. For example, right to life. It's a non-derogable right, even whether it is in peace times or war times. Like, for example, slavery, prohibition against slavery, or prohibition against torture. No matter, one state cannot derogate from its obligations, and then it cannot take away life. It cannot inflict torture. So some of these are universally respected, universally recognized human rights, and then these are moral claims also. So there are a number of reasons why politicians, political parties need to put some of these issues on their manifestos and see that, and they are not doing any charity to the public. So the human rights, like, if the rights are held against the state, and these are individuals, every human being is treated as a the moment he or she is born, they're regarded as a imbued with a number of rights.
Just a follow up question, sir. Do you think we need a greater synergy between advocacy groups and political parties, especially in 2024, perhaps?
Yes, of course, of course. See, that's why I told you about how NCP which works on disability issues, have
Mhm.
advocated for constitutional amendment by amending Article 15 to. So now that has entered into the manifestos of two political parties. So there is a need for this kind of a dialogue, and see, if you look at the various wings of the state, legislature, executive, judiciary, civil society, all of them have a role in the protection of human rights. Legislature has a role. So the legislative advocacy is important. So NGOs need to identify issues and put it in the agenda of the political parties. Sometimes some of the NGOs have prepared draft bills and given to the legislature for adoption, and we need to work with various political parties to see that human rights issues are protected through legislations.
Okay. Thank you, sir. It is your energy that drives us
No, no.
always. And thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Karthik sir, for the beautiful question, and thank you, Murthy sir, for how beautifully you concluded the interplay and need of interplay between these societies, this advocacy camps, the societies, and the political parties. And I can notice some of the raised hands still. Arvind Sharma sir, do you have any other queries, sir?
No, sir, I am done with my query.
Okay, thank
I
you.
see Yukti Kumar has raised a hand.
Yukti, yeah, yes.
Yeah. Very good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Murthy, for your session. Myself, Yukti Kumar, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Law at RV University. And, sir, I have a question for you. So, basically, whatever you have mentioned so far with regards to the laws that we have, or UDHR or Article 15, and especially, I would like to bring your notice towards Article 21, like which talks about that whosoever is there on the soil here is having a right to a dignified life. But when I work in any of this, let's say in any of the village or in any of the community, then, sir, I get very much disappointed by seeing the condition out there and reading laws and beautiful policies which is nowhere matching at the given scenario. So, what is your basically advice, or maybe what approach we should be taking as a law professors or as a law students or as a lawyers with regards to the implementation part in this field, basically?
Okay, Yukti, you need to have optimism. For instance, I know there is a disconnect between the letter of the law and the grassroots realities, but that doesn't detract from the intrinsic merit of the human rights provisions. See, already we have seen a number of successful case studies. In my course of my presentation, I have see how very bad things, very difficult conditions were converted into a better. For example, I told you about how polling booths have been made accessible, how there are incremental victories. There are, for example, you look at women alone, women's rights. So there have been some gains in the women's rights. So today women are able to get into the commissioned ranks in the army and other, so that they are breaking the glass ceiling. So there is a progress happening. But just because there are we haven't achieved the a perfect world yet, but we need to look at the violations from the human rights framework, use the human rights framework, advocate, use legal interventions and other tools to bring about the change. Okay. If in order to really appreciate the significance of human rights, Yukti, you need to just imagine for a moment what will be the world like without human rights, without Article 15, without Article 21, without UDHR, without this thing. You can be picked up, I can be picked up, arbitrarily detained, tortured. Your freedom of speech can be this thing, and so there could be multiple violations. So today, the states are looking over their shoulders at the charter-based bodies, treaty-based bodies, and they cannot. Of course, no country can today say that they don't stand for human rights. India cannot openly claim that they don't stand for human rights. But of course, governments still try and evade some of their obligations. So today, in the last 75 years or so, the world has developed a lot of norms. For instance, there are treaties dealing with torture, racial discrimination, migrant workers, person with disabilities. So many things have evolved, but their implementation, be it international treaties or be it the domestic legislation, for example, Domestic Violence Act or Dowry Prohibition Act, there are still challenges. Elimination of manual scavenging has happened. The act has been passed, but still pockets exist. For example, Article 17 says untouchability is abolished, but still untouchability is practiced in some pockets of the country. But what is important is that the struggle needs to continue, and then we need to see that there are incremental progresses, what you call, are made, and then the world becomes better. And then just because there exist certain challenges, we shouldn't lose hope. We should retain our optimism. We should use the community-based organizations should use RTI. They should continue to use the laws. They should continue to use district courts, continue to use NHRIs, SHRIs. In case they don't act, they should be shaken up. Just as I mentioned about an NGO which brought a lock to put a lock to the Human Rights Commission's building, and because it was not acting on time, it was delaying, there was a tardiness. So we should use all the this thing. So there is a hope for betterment. There's a hope for, but finally it is all of us, including academics, NGOs, media, every human being must work together to see that human rights are respected, protected, promoted.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
sir.
much.
Thank you so much for your
Uh,
thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for asking the beautiful question. There's a hell difference between what provisions had been written and the ground reality. And as Professor Murthy sir told, like it's all only upon how you use how you articulate the provisions, how you use the mechanism provided to us. And thank you, Murthy sir. And if any of the one have any query, I cannot notice any raised hand yet. I think the lecture has been a crystal clear for all the participants. Indeed. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. So with your permission, sir, can we move towards the vote of thanks?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Yeah, please. Please, Aparna. Thank you.
Since we have reached towards the end of our session, first, I would like to thank our guest speaker for today's session, Dr. Y.S.R. Murthy sir, for sparing time from his busy schedule. I thank him for sharing his thoughts on today's topic and adding dimensions to this contemporary and significant topic of human rights. I'm sure the audience gained a lot not only from the knowledge of the area involved, but the ethos and the perspective which Sir contributed owing to his work and knowledge acquired through it. We look forward to having you again with us, sir. Last but not the
Not
least,
again, but again and again and again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure interacting with all of you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
last but not the least, the driving force of this session, Club of Law Students and its founder, Mr. Soumya Sanjay, whose objective is to ensure uninterrupted dissemination of legal knowledge, which is evident from the strive made in this direction. We hope everyone enjoyed this engaging and thoughtful discussion. We look forward for more such sessions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, participants. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.